Welcome to the Central School of English Stage 7 video series. In this video, we will revise how to make sentences using relative clauses and why relative clauses are important in English. We will next learn about defining and non-defining relative clauses. A relative clause is part of a sentence. We use a relative clause to describe nouns. A relative clause tells us what person, animal, or thing the speaker is referring to. Learning relative clauses can help English speakers sound more fluent. By using relative clauses, speaking and writing become more natural, and we avoid repeating the same words in a sentence. Let's look at some examples of relative clauses. The man who is wearing a suit. In this sentence, the man is the noun, who is wearing a suit is the relative clause. The cat which has a black tail. In this sentence, the cat is the noun, which has a black tail is the relative clause. When creating a relative clause, we must begin each relative clause with a relative pronoun. Three common relative pronouns are who, that, and which. In English, there are two types of relative clauses. Defining relative clauses define which person, animal, or thing we are talking about. All the information in a defining relative clause is necessary and important. For example, my sister, who works in the city centre, is married. This sentence means I have more than one sister. The defining relative clause, who works in the city centre, identifies which one of my sisters I'm speaking about. Without using a defining relative clause, the listener would not know which sister I am speaking about. Non-defining relative clauses do not define the person, thing, or animal we are talking about. Non-defining relative clauses give extra information about a noun. For example, her husband, who comes from Rome, is in hospital. In this sentence, the relative clause, who comes from Rome, does not help us to define the noun. It gives extra information about the noun. This information is not essential in the sentence. We call this a non-defining relative clause. When we make a sentence with a non-defining relative clause, we use commas to separate the relative clause from the rest of the sentence. This helps us to determine that the information is not essential in the sentence. For example, if we compare a defining relative clause to a non-defining relative clause, my sister, who is married, is on holiday. And my sister, who is married, is on holiday. The first sentence is a defining relative clause. This sentence does not contain commas. In this sentence, the speaker has more than one sister, and the defining relative clause helps to define which sister the speaker is referring to. In the second sentence, the sentence contains commas separating the relative clause from the rest of the sentence. The information contained here is not essential information. In this sentence, the speaker only has one sister. The fact that she is married is extra information and does not help to define the noun. This is an example of a non-defining relative clause. When we make sentences with defining relative clauses, we can use the relative pronoun who to define people, which to define things and animals, and that to define people, things, and animals. However, when we make sentences with non-defining relative clauses, we cannot use the relative pronoun that. Therefore, we use the relative pronoun who for people and the relative pronoun which for things and animals. In this video, we have revised how we use relative clauses to describe nouns. We have learned that there are two types of relative clauses. We learned that defining relative clauses define which person, animal, or thing we are talking about. All of the information in a defining relative clause is necessary and important. We also learned that non-defining relative clauses do not define the person, thing, or animal we are talking about. Non-defining relative clauses give extra information about a noun. This lesson was brought to you by the Central School of English, an English school in Dublin. For more lessons, visit centralschool.ie.